Las Vegas, Nevada, September 17, 1998. Just before 4 p.m., police received a frantic 911 call. Sandy Murphy had discovered her boyfriend Ted Binion unconscious in their Rancho Palomino home. First responders rushed to the address and attempted to administer CPR, but they were far too late to save him.
He had the look that he'd been down quite a while, and when we checked him out, he was dead.
And when detectives arrived on the scene, they immediately realized this would be more than just a run-of-the-mill investigation. Ted Binion was Las Vegas royalty, a wealthy 54-year-old gambling executive and one of the heirs to the famous Binion's Horseshoe Casino.
Ted came from a famous family. They pretty much built Las Vegas.
But what was the cause of death?
He had a bottle of Xanax, an empty bottle right next to him.
In the bathroom was tar heroin, wrappers, and a cigarette lighter. It's obvious when anybody walked in that the cause of death was drug overdose.
It looked like a lifetime of hard living had finally caught up with Ted Binion. But when investigators tried to find out more from Sandy, she nearly passed out.
Sandy was frantic, and she was highly emotional, crying.
Las Vegas police were no strangers to tragic drug deaths, but many couldn't help but wonder, what could have driven a man with money and power to risk his life in such a reckless way? As detectives would soon discover, there was far more to Ted Binion's death than met the eye. Born in 1972, Sandy Murphy grew up in a world far different from the lavish lifestyle she enjoyed in Las Vegas. Raised in a working-class family in Southeast Los Angeles, Sandy's parents made sure to teach their only daughter the value of hard work.
Sandy had a good work ethic. She helped out with the family business. Her father was a repo man.
But while Sandy worked hard, she played even harder. A natural risk taker, she sought adventure on the beaches of Southern California. She loved the thrill she got from surfing, and the ambitious beauty reveled in her ability to turn more than a few heads.
She was scrappy, and you could tell that no matter what life threw her way, she was going to figure out a way to come out on top.
When she was 23, Sandy decided she'd earn some time off from the family business and booked a weekend getaway to Vegas with a girlfriend.
It was kind of a girls' weekend. They wanted to party, they wanted to gamble.
Sin City appealed to Sandy's risk-taking side, and the life savings she built up working for her parents gave her money to burn. But Sandy had forgotten the one hard and fast rule of gaming in Las Vegas. The house always wins.
She played some blackjack with a girlfriend and lost it all in one night, $12,000.
In just a few hours at the tables, Sandy went from high roller to flat busted. She didn't even have enough for the flight home. But Sandy Murphy was anything but a quitter.
Maybe she thought that instead of going home with my tail between my legs, I would go out and try to make that money back.
To make the money back, Sandy came up with a creative solution. Her girlfriend was a clothing designer, and she brought along a suitcase full of custom-made lingerie. So Sandy threw herself into a new Las Vegas-based business venture.
She decided to sell lingerie at a strip club called She Does. At that age, you just have confidence to do whatever. The lingerie thing was a great idea, and she kind of used herself to sell it a little bit.
During one sales appearance at a gentleman's club, she caught the eye of 52-year-old Ted Binion. But Ted wasn't just any heavy betting club regular. He was the heir to a Las Vegas casino empire.
Ted Binion is the son of Benny Binion, who is one of the founding fathers of Las Vegas.
Like his late father, Ted had a rowdy reputation and a wild streak a mile long.
He liked the gambling. He liked taking chances. He liked money. He liked the women.
He went to gentlemen's clubs, topless bars, and that sort of thing.
Ted took an immediate liking to Sandy. And to impress her, he tried to slip her a $1,000 tip. But Sandy surprised him by turning the money down.
She threw it right back in his face. And that was what initially attracted Ted.
That's how it started with Sandy and Teddy. They just hit it off, right off the bat.
Sandy and Ted began dating. They immediately became the hottest couple on the Strip. And Sandy quickly discovered that life in Las Vegas was far more glamorous with Ted at her side.
Within days, she had moved into the Palomino home. Ted provided Sandy a life that she always dreamed of. She had a beautiful car. She had an expense account. She went to expensive restaurants. She could buy whatever she wanted.
For a girl who had lost everything in one night at the casino, living with Ted was like winning the Megabucks jackpot. But all that would change when she met a handsome cowboy named Rick Tabish. Born in 1965 in Missoula, Montana, Rick Tabish led a privileged childhood. The son of a wealthy oil distributor, Rick was meant to go into the family business with his father. But instead, Rick mostly got into trouble.
He had a couple scrapes with the law, and I believe some theft charges.
Rick's family name almost guaranteed him a slap on the wrist from police. But in 1987, Rick got into trouble so deep that even his parents couldn't bail him out.
He started smuggling narcotics from Arizona to Missoula and was sentenced to prison.
Rick managed to plea bargain his 10-year sentence down to 3 years of probation, but it was enough to set him straight. Once he got out, Rick cultivated an entrepreneurial spirit that rivaled his wild streak.
He had his own company where he built things. He was in the construction trades.
Rick was a very hardworking fella.
Within a few years, he felt his business had outgrown the small town of Missoula. So when his probation ended in 1997, Rick traded the big sky of Montana for the bright lights of Las Vegas.
Las Vegas is the home of second chances for all, and to make a name for himself and make some money.
Once he was settled in Vegas, Rick started a new contracting company that would cater to the city's elite. In order to drum up business, Rick began to haunt the clubs, bars, and restaurants where local A-listers hung out. It was in one of these exclusive hotspots that Rick recognized Ted Binion and introduced himself. Rick's gregarious personality soon won him both Ted's business and Ted's friendship.
They had a lot in common with one another. They were both kind of cowboy-type figures.
Ted Binion was a good old boy, and Rick Tabish was a charmer. They both played off each other. Rick told Ted what he wanted to hear, and Ted loved it.
And as Rick earned Ted's trust, he became friends with Sandy as well.
Rick started to come around the house more. They went out together.
And from the moment they first met, both Sandy and Rick shared the spark of an intense physical attraction. But at first, it wasn't hard for them to ignore their temptations. Rick was busy working with Ted, while Sandy seemed satisfied with the life of luxury her millionaire boyfriend provided. But as Rick Tabish spent more time with the Binions, he also discovered that Ted had a dark secret.
He was a hardcore heroin addict.
Serious drug problems. And those had actually almost cost him his gaming license.
And Rick recognized that Ted wasn't just harming himself. His relationship with Sandy was suffering as well. And although they'd only known each other for a few weeks, Sandy confided in her new friend Rick Tabish that she was overwhelmed by Ted's addiction.
She was in love with Ted, and all Ted wanted was his heroin. She felt lost and alone and at times rejected, and she was trying to figure out, how do I help this man I care about? And if I can't help him, how am I going to help myself?
Sandy and Rick both wished that there was a way to get Ted the help that they each knew he desperately needed.
They both wanted to get Ted off of the drugs and help him get his life back together. So they kind of shared those emotions on what can we do to help him.
And as his addiction worsened, Sandy felt pushed aside by her once adoring boyfriend. Meanwhile, Sandy kept turning to Rick Tabish for a shoulder to cry on. And in their shared moment of grief, the two friends felt their mutual attraction grow stronger, until it became an intense and unbearable yearning they no longer could ignore.
It's almost some inescapable conclusion that these two will be drawn together.
The relationship between Sandy and Rick turned romantic.
Rick and Sandy felt guilty for betraying Ted, but their hunger for one another trumped any feelings of regret. Soon they were seeing each other as much as possible, while doing everything they could to keep Ted in the dark about their white-hot affair. But the same tragic addiction that made a secret couple of Rick and Sandy would also threaten to tear them apart. And a scandalous series of events would lead some to wonder if something besides drug abuse posed the greater threat to the eccentric millionaire. Coming up, police uncover a stunning secret that leads some to wonder if Ted Binion's overdose was a suicide.
It was big news here in Las Vegas. It was very hard for him to deal with.
But a late-night disturbance in the desert cast the tragedy in a more criminal light.
Deputies asked what's in the trucks.
There was 43,000 pounds of silver.
At first, 23-year-old businesswoman and lingerie model Sandy Murphy loved being the trophy girlfriend of Las Vegas VIP Ted Binion.
All of a sudden, everyone knew Sandy. It was just like royalty, like A-lister actors walking in.
But when Ted's drug use got out of control, Sandy turned to their new friend, contractor Rick Tabish, for emotional support. And it wasn't long before the two gave in to passion.
She turned to Rick as the shoulder to cry on, and it rapidly changed to romantic.
They're both good-looking people, so it makes perfect sense.
But the lovers' secret obsession was overshadowed by tragedy when Sandy found Ted dead inside their luxury home.
She was hysterical. She didn't know what to do.
All the signs at the scene pointed to Ted Binion dying of an accidental drug overdose. But with such a high-profile victim, Las Vegas knew the case would come under intense scrutiny. And they needed to be sure the cause of death wasn't something more sinister. Looking for answers, they turned to Sandy, who at first seemed too distraught to speak. But following treatment from paramedics, detectives tried to question her again and stressed the importance of her cooperation. Luckily, the young woman appeared to regain her composure and talked investigators through her live-in boyfriend's final hours. A visit from Ted's dealer was, she said, the beginning of the end.
The night before, the drug dealer came to the house and Ted bought 12 balloons of black tar heroin, which is an obscene amount for anyone.
When he came to the door, Sandy tried to prevent him from coming in. She didn't want the drug dealer there. She hated the drug dealer.
Police were astonished at Ted Binion's appetite for one of the riskiest highs around.
Black tar heroin is about as bad a drug as you can abuse. People that are using that drug have to be very wary of getting a batch that could send them not only to an emergency room, but to the morgue.
According to Sandy, Ted stayed up all night smoking the heroin he'd bought. Once he'd had his fill, he turned to prescription drugs to smooth out his come down.
After he was done, he would consume Xanax so that he could go to sleep and try to come off of the heroin high.
When Sandy left for lunch the next day, Ted was passed out on their couch like so many mornings before. But when she returned that afternoon, it was clear that something was wrong.
She comes home and she sees Ted Binion in the middle of the floor of the den on a mat, on his back, face up, and he's unresponsive.
He wasn't breathing. Foam was coming out of his mouth.
Ted Binion was dead. Sandy told police that she was heartbroken. She said she'd been holding out hope that Ted would admit how bad his problem was and seek help for his addiction.
He would do as much as he possibly could until he passed out or someone stopped him.
When police interviewed Ted's friends, they discovered that his heroin habit was a poorly kept local secret.
It was very well known in the community that he was a hardcore heroin addict. And it wasn't recreational and it wasn't fun. It was an addiction and he couldn't kick it, and maybe he didn't want to.
Ted Binion dying of an overdose probably made a lot of sense to a lot of people who knew him very well.
In fact, Ted's drug abuse had recently led the Nevada Gaming Commission to revoke his gaming license.
It was big news here in Las Vegas when Ted Binion lost his gaming license. The hotel had his name on it. The casino had his name on it. So it was very hard for him to deal with.
Banned from the business he'd spent nearly 3 decades involved in, Ted's drug abuse got worse.
He cherished being recognized as the person involved in Binion's casino. And when he lost that, his addiction worsened.
Investigators couldn't help but wonder, was it possible Ted Binion intentionally OD'd on heroin? Was his death a suicide? Ted's family and close friends didn't think so. Those who knew him best admitted Ted's drug habit was bad, but he wasn't suicidal. And no matter how depressed Ted may have been about the casino business, he would have known that mixing heroin, Xanax, and Valium was a recipe for disaster. That sentiment seemed to be confirmed when Ted's autopsy results returned. It was enough for officials to rule that Ted Binion's death had been an accidental overdose.
The medical examiner determined that Ted had both heroin and Xanax in his system. And the medical examiner believed it was enough to kill him.
That was consistent with the original findings of the responders at the scene. It was consistent with the report by the toxicology. Nothing suggestive of any type of criminal wrongdoing.
But just as Las Vegas police were closing the case, there was a bizarre new development. On the night of September 18th, locals in Pahrump, Nevada, noticed some unusual activity.
There was some ruckus going on in the desert in Pahrump. Someone was digging out there with a huge piece of equipment.
Late Friday night was a strange time to begin construction, and irate neighbors soon flooded the sheriff's office with complaints. When deputies confronted the crew, the man in charge was reluctant to say what they were up to, but he did give police his name: Rick Tabish.
Police saw Rick Tabish and others with trucks and all sorts of major equipment, and the local sheriff just has a gut reaction that something's wrong.
The sheriff's officers came over to find out, what are you guys doing? Oh, nothing to see here. And the deputies asked, well, what's in the trucks?
When suspicious deputies searched the crew's trucks, they couldn't believe their eyes. Rick Tabish had dug a fortune in silver bars and rare coins out of the ground.
There was 43,000 pounds of silver.
Coming up, investigators discovered the truth behind the buried treasure,
Ted Binion owned millions of dollars worth of silver,
leading them to believe Ted Binion's death wasn't an accident after all.
It made perfect sense that maybe they would want Ted out of the picture.
Ted Binion's hardcore drug addiction had pushed his girlfriend Sandy Murphy into the arms of his close friend, a rugged and ambitious contractor named Rick Tabish.
Sandy was going through so much that she really relied on Rick, and it just developed into love.
But their illicit affair had been turned upside down when Sandy found Ted dead from an overdose of illegal drugs.
Black tar heroin is about as bad a drug as you can abuse.
And a few days later, Sandy's relationship troubles had continued when sheriff's deputies caught Rick trying to liberate a cache of buried treasure in the desert.
It was probably $7 million or $8 million worth of silver bars.
There were a few red flags, including the fact that it was in the middle of the night, and also Rick Tabish not being forthcoming with exactly what he was doing, why he was there.
Sheriffs were puzzled by the bizarre discovery. Why was a stash of silver buried underneath a vacant lot an hour south of Vegas? And how did Rick know about it? Did it belong to him? Or was he stealing it from someone else? Rick quickly explained that the silver had belonged to his good friend, the recently deceased Ted Binion. Rick claimed that when Ted forfeited his gaming license, he lost the right to store a fortune in silver bars and rare coins in the casino's vault.
Teddy had to remove his belongings and assets from the Horseshoe Club. So he had to move all that bullion and coin.
What do you do with thousands of pounds of silver? You can't put it in a bank. You don't put it at home.
And as his most trusted friend, Ted had hired Rick to build the underground vault and discreetly transport the silver there for safekeeping.
Ted developed such great trust in Rick to haul this silver to Pahrump.
Few outside of Ted and Rick knew of the vault's existence. And according to Rick, Ted left strict instructions about what to do with it in case of his death.
Rick explained that Ted Binion had made him promise that should something ever happen to him, he was to immediately come and empty the vault to protect the silver.
Neither police nor Binion's family were buying Rick's story. The fact that he'd come under cover of darkness to dig up a dead man's fortune was reason enough to suspect he wasn't telling the truth.
Nothing about this story made sense. If Ted needed somebody to take care of his business, the family believed he would have asked somebody in the family, not this cowboy from Montana that none of them really knew.
Rick and his crew were charged with theft. But before detectives could question Rick further, he made bail. And police got another surprise when they saw who showed up to pay the money for his release.
3 days later, Rick is bailed out of jail by Sandy Murphy.
Ted's family was immediately suspicious of her motives. They told investigators that they'd never trusted Sandy or her relationship with Ted.
They thought she was a gold digger. They thought she wasn't good for Ted. They didn't want anything to do with her.
And when Ted's will was read, the Binions were enraged to discover that Ted had left everything to his girlfriend.
The house was worth about $1 million, and the contents of the house, including fine art, was worth about $300,000.
They immediately began challenging whether or not Sandy was entitled to any of that inheritance.
To the Binions, who believed Sandy was only with Ted for his money in the first place, it seemed like plenty of reason for her to commit murder.
The Binion family began to suspect that foul play had actually occurred.
But while detectives agreed that the silver theft looked suspicious, there was no evidence either Sandy or Rick had anything to do with Ted's death.
Ted Binion bought the drugs. She wasn't even with him half the time.
Ted's family didn't see it that way. They were convinced that Sandy knew more than she was telling police. And led by Ted's sister Becky, the Binion family decided to hire their own investigator to prove it.
They wanted to figure out what was going on. They had the resources to do it. They went ahead and did it. Becky hired a private investigator and started the digging.
The Binion's private detective went back over the evidence, hoping to convince Las Vegas police it was a homicide. And in order to do that, he first wanted to establish that Sandy and Rick's affair gave them reason to kill her boyfriend.
The affair was a key thing, a love triangle, a motive for murder.
He traced Sandy's credit card expenses and found that she and Rick hadn't been quite as discreet as they thought.
The two of them had gone away for the weekend to a hotel in California and had a very romantic weekend together.
But the hotel guest book showed Sandy hadn't signed in under her own name. Instead, she signed in as Rick's wife.
She signed the check at the hotel as S.M. Tavish.
Their relationship was clearly more than just an illicit affair. And Sandy stood to gain a lot more than just her freedom by getting Ted out of the way.
It made perfect sense that maybe they would want Ted out of the picture so they could still have his money, but they didn't have to worry about him.
The PI's suspicions were raised further when he talked to Ted's housekeeper, who revealed that Sandy had asked her to take the day off on the morning Ted had died. And Sandy's manicurist recalled a suspicious conversation the two women had 3 weeks before Ted's death.
Sandy had come to see her and that they had gotten into some chit-chat while she was doing Sandy's nails. And Sandy had predicted that Ted might be dead any day now, based on his heroin use.
He's going to overdose, he's going to kill himself, and she was very adamant at saying that this is going to happen.
Sandy's prediction of Ted's overdose certainly raised red flags, as did a conversation the Binion's investigator discovered between Rick Tavish and one of his longtime friends prior to Ted's death.
Rick had gone to him to say, how do I get rid of somebody? How do I get rid of a casino boss, asking for advice?
It was damning circumstantial evidence. But was it true? Had Sandy and Rick actually conspired to kill Ted Binion? So far, neither police nor the Binion family PI had been able to uncover any direct evidence of foul play. But that was about to change. Coming up, stunning new evidence suggests Ted Binion knew someone was trying to kill him.
Ted had told him the day before he died, if I'm dead tomorrow, you'll know what happened to me.
And a breathtaking revelation turns the entire case on its head.
When it was announced, it sent shockwaves through the city.
Sandy Murphy and Rick Tavish's once secret romance was under suspicion following the sudden drug overdose of Las Vegas millionaire Ted Binion. Up until this point, the coroner believed the overdose had been accidental. But Ted Binion's family strongly believed otherwise.
The Binion family is convinced early on that Ted was murdered.
The family believes that Sandy Murphy and Rick Tavish killed Ted Binion, and they got away with it.
A private investigator also uncovered credit card records of lavish spending that suggested Sandy and Rick could have had a financial motive to murder Ted. Along with strange and suspicious statements the cheating couple had made to several friends and business associates in the days before Ted died, all of which persuaded the coroner's office to reevaluate Ted's cause of death. And when re-examining the toxicology report while looking for signs of foul play, one suspicious detail stood out.
There was some residue in his stomach, and they said that he had ingested some of the drugs.
Ted's method of smoking heroin would have left very little trace of the drug in his stomach. So it appeared the fatal cocktail of heroin and Xanax had gotten into Ted's system some other way.
You can accidentally take something that's going to kill you, or someone could put it in your system, whether it's mixed in a drink or injected into you.
It was a detail that had gone unnoticed when authorities assumed Ted's overdose had been accidental. But the unusual toxicology findings were enough for Las Vegas law enforcement to reconsider whether Ted's overdose had been an accident after all.
When the coroner came out and announced that they were changing their opinion and that Ted Binion had been murdered.
When it was announced that this was a homicide as opposed to a natural death, it did send shockwaves through the city.
Now, police turned their full attention to the two with the most to gain from Ted Binion's death.
So police start investigating the relationship between Rick Tavish and Sandy Murphy.
But while detectives were investigating the lovers, Rick and Sandy acted as if they didn't have a care in the world. With their relationship now public, the pair were openly living together.
They didn't try to hide anything, and guilty people don't live their lives in open. They try to hide things, so it seemed like nothing was wrong.
But investigators believed otherwise. An examination of Ted's bank statements and credit card bills revealed that Ted Binion had been unknowingly bankrolling Sandy and Rick's illicit affair.
They went down to the beach and stayed at a ritzy hotel. Ted basically was paying for the trips because he gave her credit cards.
They're young, they're in love, and they don't have to pay for anything, and the sky is the limit. That had to be amazing for them, and it probably just added to the level of attraction that was going on between them.
Ted's friends told police that Ted may have been in the dark about the affair, but in the weeks leading up to his death, he began to suspect something was going on with his girlfriend.
He was on the verge of having private detectives start to follow her because he was getting suspicious.
If Ted had found proof of the affair, Rick and Sandy's free ride would have ended. It seemed to investigators that as far as Rick and Sandy were concerned, Ted Binion was worth more to them dead than alive.
The theory was that Sandy would inherit the house and all of its contents. Rick thought he was going to get away with $7 million worth of silver, and so the two of them would be set.
A peek into Rick's personal finances revealed that his supposedly successful construction business wasn't as lucrative as he pretended it was. It turned out Rick owed the IRS more than $100,000. Detectives also learned that a sizable outstanding business loan Rick owed had come due just 2 days before Ted's death.
There was evidence that Rick Tabish may have been financially destitute and that he needed money, and he needed to get it fast.
Rick and Sandy seemed to have all the motive in the world to kill Ted Binion, but the evidence was circumstantial at best. What police needed was proof of a conspiracy to commit murder. Hoping to uncover more solid evidence, police obtained warrants for Sandy and Rick's phone records. And when detectives focused on Sandy's phone calls on the day of Ted's death, they hit the jackpot. According to Sandy's phone records, police weren't the first ones to learn of Ted Binion's death. Rick Tabish was.
She called Rick Tabish shortly before she called police to report the death.
If Sandy had really been distraught when she discovered Ted's body, then why had her first call been to her lover?
Certainly the fact that she called Rick Tabish is the sort of thing you want to take a close look at.
And when detectives learned Rick had done time on narcotics charges back in Montana, they couldn't help but wonder, given his drug connections, was it possible Rick had helped stage Ted's death to look like an overdose? Their theories seemed to be confirmed when Ted Binion's estate attorney informed police of a conversation he'd had with his client less than 24 hours before Sandy reported finding him dead.
The day prior to Ted Binion's death, he received a telephone call from Ted saying, "Take Sandy out of my will."
It seemed Ted Binion had somehow learned of Sandy and Rick's affair, and that he'd planned to cut Sandy off financially. He'd also apparently grown suspicious that the couple meant him harm, based on a chilling statement he told his attorney before he hung up.
Ted said, "Take Sandy out of the will. If she doesn't kill me tonight, if I'm dead, you'll know what happened."
To police, it looked like Sandy and Rick had gotten rid of Ted before he could sign the changes to the will, leaving Sandy as the primary beneficiary.
The picture that starts to emerge is that Sandy was on the way out.
Her financial situation would change radically.
Investigators now believed they finally had enough to arrest the lovers. On the afternoon of June 24th, 10 months after Ted Binion's overdose, Sandy and Rick were shopping at a local grocery store when they were confronted in the parking lot by Las Vegas police.
They came out and they were surrounded by what appeared to be a SWAT team.
The DA's charges against Rick and Sandy included the murder of Ted Binion and the plot to steal from his home and the silver vault outside of town. But charging Rick and Sandy was one thing, convicting would be another. Prosecutors carefully prepared their case, and almost a year and a half later, the trial of Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish finally began.
The Binion murder trial was one of the most captivating stories this town has ever seen.
Prosecutors told the jury that the case came down to one thing: greed. They claimed Rick had been motivated by a mountain of debt, and Sandy was obsessed with holding on to her life of luxury. When Ted became aware of Rick and Sandy's affair, he began making moves to remove Sandy from his will. So the couple conspired to kill Ted before the changes could be made, ensuring that Sandy inherited Ted's millions.
They really played that up and made her out to be the vixen and the person who killed her live-in boyfriend for money and for love.
Based on the medical examiner's findings, prosecutors claimed that in the early morning hours of September 17, 1998, Rick Tabish and Sandy Murphy had forced the deadly concoction of Xanax and heroin down Ted Binion's throat. But that wasn't all. The Binions hired their own medical expert, who presented evidence to support a new theory of how Sandy and Rick had conspired to kill Ted.
Dr. Bodden was a hired expert. He was hired to do an investigation of the autopsy. He found that the cause of death was not accidental overdose, but rather homicide. He found that there was evidence of suffocation.
The signs of suffocation were slight. Like the suspicious toxicology findings, they'd gone unnoticed in the original coroner's report when foul play wasn't suspected. And when combined with the story of Ted's last-second attempt to remove Sandy from his will, it seemed to have the jury spellbound. But the defense countered that the case was entirely circumstantial. There was no physical evidence connecting Sandy or Rick to Ted's overdose or suffocation. They even cast Sandy as Ted's savior, not his murderer.
The defense basically said that she was a caring person who stuck by Ted even during the bad times, and that she was trying to get him help.
Finally, the case went to the jury. Both sides sweated out the possible verdict for more than a week. Then, on May 19th, 2000, the jury announced their decision.
Both Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish were found guilty of killing Ted Binion. They were sentenced to life in prison, and that's where everyone thought that they would end up and spend the rest of their lives.
For the Binion family, it seemed that justice had been served. But as they were about to find out, the case of Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish was far from over. Coming up, a shocking development gives the lovers new hope.
Key witnesses were paid rewards for their testimony.
Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish were a pair of lovers who'd been convicted of murdering her boyfriend, Horseshoe Casino heir Ted Binion, after he tried to cut Sandy out of his will. The deadly duo had been sentenced to life in prison. But if Ted's family thought they'd seen the last of Sandy and Rick, they were sorely mistaken.
The next thing that happens is Sandy appeals, and she hires famed attorney Alan Dershowitz to handle the appeal.
Sandy and Rick's new defense team discovered that Ted's family tried to use their wealth and influence to ensure a conviction against the lovers.
So it came out during the appeal that some of these key witnesses that really may have swayed the jury were paid rewards for their testimony.
Binions posted up a $100,000 reward, and they divided it. Some got $20,000, some got $10,000, some got $5,000.
In July of 2003, the Nevada Supreme Court ruled in favor of Sandy and Rick and ordered that their cases be retried. When the new trials began, the defense called new witnesses to debunk the state's version of Ted's death.
There was no evidence of suffocation. Medical testimony after medical testimony came in to support that.
And without the prosecution's key witnesses, both sides knew the results would hinge on the medical examiner's autopsy report.
When you don't have the testimony of witnesses, All you really have is the medical evidence, and it's pretty much circumstantial.
The defense argued that the report proved there was no medical basis to conclude cause of death was anything other than an accidental drug overdose. Combined with proof of witness tampering, it seemed there might be enough reasonable doubt to overturn Rick and Sandy's convictions.
I think the fact that the jury heard that the estate of Ted Binion was paying individuals in exchange for their testimony was incredibly devastating to their case.
The new jury agreed, at least halfway. Sandy and Rick were acquitted of Ted Binion's murder. But they were again found guilty of conspiring to steal his fortune.
You could have heard a pin drop when the verdicts were read. It was a shock. Everybody was shocked.
More than 6 years after Ted Binion had been discovered dead in his mansion, the final verdict was in. To some, it seemed like the lovers had gotten away with murder. But to others, it was vindication for 2 young people who'd almost been railroaded into spending the rest of their lives in prison for a crime they didn't commit.
I have no idea whether Rick Tavish and Sandra Murphy were guilty in connection with the death of Ted Binion, but rarely have I seen 2 individuals who took steps, possibly inadvertently, that made them look guilty.